Hi there, and welcome to the 69th OctoPrint on Air. I'm your host, Gina Heuske, and as always, welcome to this episode. First of all, it's a bit late for that by now, but still, Happy New Year. Welcome to 2026. I hope you landed safe and sound in this year. So, as always, a quick short outline of what we are going to talk about, and that will be what I have been up to since the last episode of these, and also what the next steps will be. And so let's just get right into it and talk about what I have been up to. So, the most important thing that probably most of you saw was that I released OctoPrint 1.11.6, which is a pure bug fix release. I pushed this out on January 27th, and it contained one security fix for a rather theoretical timing attack of moderate severity, where if you have enough time and a very time-stable network connection, it was possible to guess API keys. And that is obviously not something that we want. And so I fixed that. In general, this attack, as I said, it is a purely theoretical thing. We don't have there was no actually working proof of concept across the network of this working, and latencies and such will make it really, really tricky to actually get this working, this approach. But still, it got fixed, and as it was a security issue, it also got priority, and I pushed out a bug fix release as fast as I could after Christmas. I got this reported somewhere around, I think, the very last few days of December, but I'm not entirely sure. It could also have been early days of January. So yeah. Another thing that went into this release was a bug fix in the achievements plugin. Because what I realized with the rollout of the wrapped plugin, which I pushed out last year as a little Christmas gift, basically, is that the stats were not handling year changes correctly. So if the OctoPrint server was running while the new year happened, it would never close the old stats file of the old year and open a new stats file for the new year. And that meant that the stats would accumulate. So basically, if you had 100 prints in 2025 and then New Year 2026 and now print something and the server was running in between, then now you suddenly have something like 101 files, but only until you shut down the server for the first time. So if you have a runtime of over a year, you probably had a lot of stats in one single file. But I fixed this now. So I built in a little detection of, first of all, of course, I fixed the year rollover situation so that whenever it was trying to write stats, it would check whether it actually had the right file still open, and if not, create a new one, basically. But I also built in some detection logic that would check if all of the data that it keeps in order to be able to give you stats was larger or equal to what it already had. So if it looks at 2026 and it sees 101 prints in there, and then it looks at 2025 and it sees 100 prints in there, then this is one more print. If, on the other hand, in 2026 it would only see 80 prints in there, then obviously this is smaller than 100. So something happened in between that reset this particular stat. And so it did all of that for all of the stats that increase, like number of prints, number of logged achievements, number of server starts, stuff like that. And if all of them are larger, then it will now basically make a copy of the current year. Sorry, not make a copy, but they basically subtract all of the data from the past year, from the current year, and use that then. and some other smaller logic stuff, like when was the largest print, when the longest print, when did this happen, and if this is in the old year, then this is also a sign that something is wrong there. So yeah, I tested this a lot, and I also built in some unit tests to make sure this will not break, because the problem with this specific issue is obviously usually you will only see this breaking once per year. So bugs like that are always kind of meh, because you don't notice them until long after you implemented something. And that was the case here. But yeah. And what I also did was I built in a reset button in case stuff is severely wrong in your view. So you can always reset your stats now. And that is now accessible in the achievements and instance stat settings. And you can also now see the stats of the current year in the stats view in the About dialog. So that will hopefully also help figuring out if something is going wrong during the year. And what I also did in 1.11.6 was there was some logic issue in the Upload Manager plugin for multi-select. So when you were holding Control or Shift and Control and Shift, stuff like that, to select multiple files and multiple file Bereich auf English. Okay, my English just lost me, and I only can speak German right now, apparently. So, yeah, like 3 files up on the top, and then 4 files down, and then you first of all go, you click up, and then you go 3 files down and click Shift, and then you hold Control, and also do the same at the bottom. And there was a logic error in there, causing off by one problems where not the last file was getting selected, but actually only the one before and stuff like that. And so this got fixed. And while I was doing that, I also fixed a problem with reported by the same person, by the way, I think, but I forgot their name. Sorry. I also fixed a problem with under Mac OS, because it turns out under Mac OS you actually don't hold Control in order to select multiple things with a click, but what was it? Command, if I remember correctly. I thought that I was actually doing this correctly in JavaScript, but apparently I wasn't. So this is also now fixed. And then there was also a bug fix in there on how settings preprocessors are handled, which was broken for ages now and never noticed, because no plugin ever utilized preprocessors in that specific way, apparently, and neither did I in OctoPrint. And so it took a while, but yeah, thanks to Jacopo for fixing that. And all in all, it was a quite good rollout from what I can see. The one thing that made me go a bit is that one new bug crept in due to these Mac OS behavior changes in the Upload Manager, because for that I had to put in some new user agent checks in the core of the UI. And there was a bug in there that if the user agent could not detect the OS name and thus would not set it, then an error would happen there, an exception would be thrown there. And the problem is this doesn't happen in a regular browser, but it does happen in Prusa Slicer's web view. So if you have OctoPrint embedded in Prusa Slicer and try to access it there, then with 1.11.6 it will not load properly. This has now been fixed on the bug fix branch already and is ready for a rollout as part of either 1.11.7. 1.11.7, that's a funny number, or 1.12, depending on what happens first. But this is the only thing that has currently happened on the bug fix branch for 1.11.7. I really hope I have to roll this out after all, now that I've heard this version a bit. So this is the only thing so far in the bug fix branch for 1.11.7, and as I mentioned, a bunch of times by now. Every single release, even a small bug fix release, even a really small bug fix release, comes with a ton of overhead because I obviously have to do a lot of testing to make sure that the updates work correctly to this version. And I could, of course, just say, what can go wrong? I'm only changing some front-end things here, but still I have my checklist. I will go through my checklist because whenever I ignore my checklist, stuff does go wrong. So I wouldn't ignore it here either. And thus we are looking at something like half a day to a day of overhead just to push out a new release. And yeah, I would prefer to wait a bit longer if there are any more bugs that can be fixed and pushed out alongside this specific bug fix instead of just pushing this on its own because, yeah, overhead. But if you're affected, for now, you can either use a standalone browser for accessing OctoPrint, which works flawlessly, or you can use Orca Slicer because that doesn't have this specific problem, or you can downgrade to 1.11.5, or you can manually upgrade to what's in the bug fix branch. So if you need to figure out how to do that, I think there was a forum post about this that should explain this. So that was 1.11.6. It turns out that this was actually quite a lot, given that there wasn't that much time between 1.11.5 and that one, or at least not much time where I was actually where I was actually in the office, basically. But yeah, there you have it. What else did I do? Obviously, working on 1.12.0 because I really want to get this out of the door sooner rather than later. One thing still missing that I wanted to get into this release is, or in the new release, is support for cross-storage copy move. What I Just as a reminder, what I did in 1.12.0 is I basically created a new interface to support something I call printer connectors, which are thingies, connectors that implement some certain APIs that OctoPrint expects to be able to talk to a printer and implement them against something like the serial interface that we so far knew. So the serial connector will be bundled, but also against other printer interfaces that we so far did not support. For example, I'm also heavily working on a Moonraker connector to enable working with off-the-shelf Moonraker/Clipper printers that come from the vendor this way. And we are also working with Jim. I'm also working on a Bamboo connector to do the same with the Bamboo printers. Local only, without the cloud. And while I did this in order to allow uploading to SD on the SD connector, I also had to implement the printer files, so the files stored on the printer, on the SD card or in the internal memory or whatever there is. So basically what is stored on your printer with regards to G-code. I also had to turn this into its proper storage. OctoPrint has an internal class called File Manager. The File Manager so far only was able to manage your local files, but it was already using a storage interface for that I defined something like 10 years ago or so. But I never did the work to actually turn the serial interface file stuff into its own storage, and I now did this. So now we have the printer storage and the local storage ship with OctoPrint, and in theory you could also throw in something like a USB storage or I don't know, some cloud storage or something, depending on, you basically just could throw in a plugin that provides a storage interface and registers the storage interface and implements the API and does things like file download and file upload and whatnot. That way it works, and then OctoPrint can interact with it. And what I now wanted to do, that was a very long preview, or not preview, but a very long start of things. What I now wanted to do was to actually support cross-storage copy move, because up until the work that I now did for 1.12, you could still only manage the files in one storage, but not across one storage. And this is what I did now. So that required a lot of UI work inside the Upload Manager plugin, which is what will support this. So the backend was already there, but the front end was simply not there. And now you can do something like shift select 10 files or so on your local storage and then copy them over or even move them over to your printer storage, as long as the storage from which you copy supports reading files, which, for example, the serial storage does not, the serial connectors printer storage does not, which is why, for example, you cannot download stuff from the printer's SD on Marlin or something to OctoPrint. This is not a limitation that I put in there intentionally. There's simply no way to do it. This was never implemented in printer firmware to read files. It is a write-only interface. But so as long as the source of these operations supports reading and the target supports writing, then we can copy. If the source also supports removing, then we can move. And this is basically how this is implemented. And the UI will detect whether stuff works or not and give you these buttons depending on whether stuff works or not. And then I also, of course, because you can select multiple files for this, needed to implement basically a bunch of other things to allow to do this to multiple files with an API that only allows it to do it to one file per request. Sorry. And but I did all of that. And now that works, and that is really, really nice. Of course, if you are copying multiple files through the serial connectors storage, good luck with that, because this is still slow, as it has always been. And once again, this is not something that I decided on, but this is a firmware limitation, because you still have to send each and every G-code file line by line, as basically like you would be printing it, but without the printer actually printing it, but instead writing it to an SD card file. So that is also why, as a reminder, I introduced a setting in the serial connector where you can basically disable file upload to SD card, because it is really slow. And if you do not use that, and if you do not want to use that, then disabling that will prevent accidents that take a long time. Yeah. What else did I do? I also improved detection of duplicates in the file rename dialog, because we had a bit of a user experience issue there. So basically I have to start from the beginning there as well. OctoPrint local storage supports a display file name, and also a file name under which it is stored. Because, for example, Windows does not support certain characters, Linux does not support certain characters in your file name, but we want to allow these characters in the display. So there's this separate thing. But this also means that that separate display file names can map to the same underlying internal name. And this is where things get tricky from a user experience perspective. And this is where the file rename dialog will now do a better job in detecting if there are collisions, and to help you through these collisions, and also to make these collisions more transparent. And so basically showing you, you called this file this and this, but this maps to the internal name blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah is already taken, something like that. Up until now, it only told you, you named it this and this and this already exists, even though you were absolutely sure this and this does not exist. So, yeah. I actually still need to replicate this behavior in the upload manager's rename dialog, I just realized. Ugh, okay, maybe I can somehow reuse the one from the internal file thing. Yeah. I also played, so what else did I do? I also played a lot of whack-a-mole with small bugs here and there, because while I was doing all of these things, I ran into the one or other minor issue that I then looked into, and while looking into, I found other minor issues, and then I solved these, and then this thing with 99 bottles on the wall, and for developers, it sometimes goes 99 bugs on the wall, take one down, create a patch, 101 bugs on the wall. So basically, this was going on a lot as well. But in the end, I prevailed and I won. I also made OctoPrint compatible to Python 3.14. So OctoPrint 1.12, I should add. That was thankfully mostly just a case of changing the version limit in the project settings, but I also had to hunt down and fix a bunch of deprecation warnings. Then while doing that, I also ran across a lot of unit test warnings that I finally fixed. And so I could harden the CI checks again, a bit again, so that now a warning in a unit test will create an error and a test failure, which is really nice because it gives us early notifications about anything changing in APIs in a subtle way. I also added a new achievement, but I'm not telling you what. I exposed the re-authentication timeout on the UI because a lot of you asked if there was some way to make this a bit more accessible. And yeah, I still would not recommend to set it to 0, which will disable the re-authentication prompts. But yeah, if you run OctoPrint completely local and only you have access, and there is no way that anyone who should not be able to access it, then by all means, do what you want to do. You already could change this, by the way, but you couldn't do it through the UI. You had to edit a config file, and that was something that apparently worried people out there. So yeah, now there is a UI option with a big fat warning next to it. And what I also added was a requested feature from a while ago, which was allowing tracking whether relative or absolute mode is currently active in the G-code script. So to explain, and sorry, I really should have put a bottle of water or something here right next to me because the air is exceptionally dry apparently. Sorry. I'm going to dial this down in post. So the thing here is that you have these G-code scripts that you can configure in OctoPrint where, for example, if the printer is paused or the print is resumed, you can send certain G-code things over G-code commands to the printer, and you can script these also with a template language and rely on certain parameters from before. For example, the temperature, you can, if you pause the print, you could cool down the print head to basically disable the hot end. And then when you resume, prior to resuming, you could heat up again to the temperature. And that would be something that comes from a variable, the temperature, in that case, the last temperature command that OctoPrint saw being sent to your printer while the print job was running. And the same was available for some other parameters like fan speed and stuff like that. But what it wasn't yet available for was whether relative or absolute mode was enabled for the movements and also for the extruder. The problem now is that your firmware does know whether it also affects the extruder when you send it a G90 or a G91, or whether that only affects X, Y, and Z. Your firmware does know whether an M82 or an M83 is able to override what you set from a G90 or a G91 and what it will fall back to if you disable one or the other. So this seems to be a very, very firmware-specific thing. I went through a lot of source code, and there was so much difference in there. And then we, of course, also have the vendor forks out there that probably do things completely differently as well. There is no capability flag at all to figure out whether M82 and M83, whether G90 or G91 influence the extruder or not. There is no way to figure out whether they can coexist, G90, G91, and M82 and M83, or whether they disable each other or something like that. And from the implementation details that I saw on the source of various firmware variants out there, there is a lot of differences there and subtle differences that then will cause a lot of problems down the road. So what I did is not tracking. What I'm now tracking is not whether X, Y, and Z are absolute or relative, and the extruder is absolute or relative. What I rather track is whether OctoPrint last sent to the printer something like a G90 or a G91, or whether OctoPrint last sent an M82 or an M83. So there are two new parameters that are basically, I think, something, I can't remember how I called them, but something like, I think, movement mode and extruder mode or something like that. And that will, or command, something like, I really can't remember right now. I have to check the commit for that. But it will basically tell you whether the last thing that OctoPrint sent to your printer was a G90 or a G91 for the one kind of setting or variable. And the other one tracks M82 or M83. And that way, you know your firmware best, or your printer's behavior best. You can then script accordingly, so that things are in the right mode. At least that is the hope. I really wish I could have properly told you whether your axis or your extruder is currently in absolute or relative mode. But as I said, that is something that is just too firmware specific, and trying to do a blind guess here and hoping for the best would just cause issues on all sides. So yeah, I did not do that. Instead did the other thing. So what else did I do? I also put some work in the aforementioned Moonraker connector, hunted down an error in there that was still causing refresh issues on the file list. There's still some problem in there where sometimes on the first loading of the file list, it doesn't fully populate. So some folders are missing, and then you hit refresh and everything populates. I have not yet been able to figure out what is going on there. And I cannot reliably reproduce this, but I hope to be able to find and nuke this from the orbit as well. And I also fixed the bug that prevented empty folders from showing. And if I remember correctly, that is still a problem with the Bamboo connector, so I'll have to take a look what is going on there. Another thing that I did, and that was really not something that I wanted to do, was replacing dying hardware. Because so 2025 really was the year of dying network gear here in my home office for some reason. Back in summer, I came from the Dutch hacker camp from the Y home to a completely and utterly broken router. So I had to replace that. And then a few weeks later, the main switch started dying. And so I replaced this. And then shortly after Christmas, I came into my office to check something. And the printers couldn't go online. My laptop couldn't go online. My phone couldn't go online, despite the access point being there. The access point was there, but it did not have a network connection because the switch it was connected to, which is my office main switch, was broken. So, or not broken, but it crashed repeatedly because this kept happening every few days. So a restart would make things work again. But so any case, I needed a new switch. But this is something that I only set up once I was back in the office for good. And yeah, so that was unplanned work, but at least for now it should hopefully hold a bit again. And the upside of this is also that I now have 4 power over Ethernet ports on this switch, and not 1. One is what I needed for the access point, and I now could actually add a power over Ethernet head to my Testrix controller Pi, so that is now fully powered through the network and the router as well, and I could get rid of yet another power supply dangling around, and that is really, really nice. Yeah. And what I also did, a vacation. Yeah. A few weeks off and reading and playing games and sleeping, and mostly sleeping if I'm honest. That was also really, really necessary. Yeah, I also actually went to the Black Forest again for a week with my partner to celebrate our anniversary, and we did a lot of a lot of hiking through the mountainsides and sightseeing basically there, and yeah, amazing views here and there from the Alps and stuff, and of the Alps, and yeah, I finally also managed to make it on the Feldberg, which I so far never topped. So really nice. The view from there was amazing. We had extremely good luck with the weather on that day. It was windy, very, very windy, but blue sky and sun and such, and an amazing view. So that was really great. And my shoes died on the way down again. So yeah, but thankfully I still made it down. Okay. So that was all that I've been up to. Now, what are the next steps? Obviously, a heavy push to finally get 112.0 RC1 out. I hope that I'm now done with the whack-a-mole party. But frankly, I'm expecting quite a number of release candidates until 112.0 can see a full release. I'm obviously doing everything that I can to iron out as much as I can before I push out the first release candidate, because a release candidate is supposed to be a release candidate and not a let's find all the bugs candidate. But there was so much refactoring done to make the connectors work and to extract the printer storage into its own storage interface. And that was, the amount of changes that were needed for that were about as heavy or maybe even heavier in some parts than the switch to Python 3 was back then when. So it is a big release, or it is going to be a big release, though most of what will have changed once it rolls out is in the back end and in the plugin API, the available options to extend it and such. But as much work as that is, and as much as it makes my brain hurt sometimes, I think it will be worth it. Because in the end, all of the work that I've been doing now for the past year on 112 enables OctoPrint to stay an open, privacy-focused alternative to all of these vendor-pushed thingies that you get with modern printers. I don't know if you noticed, but everything left and right is currently enshittifying, and vendors are doing their best to do this to 3D printing as well, from what I have seen also at FormNext last year. And my wish is with OctoPrint to continue to offer control, even if more and more vendors are trying to take that away from you. And I really hope that the community also gets together and does its part to keep this a reality, meaning in order to support proprietary printers, we will need connector plugins for them. In order for me to be able to continue maintaining OctoPrint, I will need funding. It is basically in our hands as the 3D printing community to not let this hobby enshitify. So I hope that this will work out. To be honest, I'm extremely worried about the current tendencies towards vendor lock-in, closed gardens, and reduced control. And obviously also data collection that I saw with recent bundled software packages on printers that were sold on Amazon and such. And also, as I said, what I saw on at FormNext. And personally, I think you should probably also be very worried about that, because that way lies less freedom and more expenses basically also to run the hobby if you suddenly need a subscription in order to print more than 20 models per month or something like that. Yeah, so these changes are certainly not what pulled me into 3D printing well over a decade ago now. Back then, everything was still open source, and if you try to push out as a vendor, if you try to push out a printer that did not have an open interface and that required you to install their software version of whatever and only that, and you had a bit of a shitstorm on your hands. And these days, sadly, this no longer happens, and this is a bit worrying as well. But anyhow, the next one of these, we are coming to the end here. The next one of these will be, I guess, in early March or something like that. We now have early February, and so early March sounds like a good idea, I think. And yeah, as always, I hope it was interesting. Thank you in any case for being here. Stay healthy, of course, and happy printing. Bye.